Welcome back to our discussion of 14 defining characteristics of fascism. Yesterday we talked about labor power being suppressed, and today we're going to look at disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Fascist nations tend to promote and tolerate open hostility to higher education and academia. It is not uncommon for professors and other academics to be censored or even arrested. Free expression in the arts and letters is openly attacked. Oh dear.
That's definitely happening in many different ways. Just the fact that these alt-right and Trump have said before they hate educated people. Educated people are a problem. They made a registry for professors, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, it's called the Professor Watch List.
Yeah. A professor watch list. Like, everybody listening should just let that sink in. You know, you can't get more Orwellian than that. Come on now.
No, and it's I have seen people fired over the last few months that for shit that would have never even come up in the past. And or even if they're not fired, the amount of kind of complaining or going to the dean, and schools aren't willing to, really what it is ultimately is Breitbart or Fox or the Daily Stormer or even the Daily Caller will grab a hold of somebody's name or something that they've said in the past or in the present, and they will take it out of context, and it's been just splatter all over their websites. And then these alt-right and mostly Nazis specifically start calling the school. And usually when that starts happening, they start harassing the actual university or the college. And that's where we're starting to see some really big problems come in at. Now, these people, academics go on CNN or MSNBC or Fox, or that's what we do if we have a specialty. And even when that doesn't happen, we get mad. Like, why don't they ask us to do these things? Like, it's very rare to see a sociologist on television, and we fucking know about human behavior. That's what we do. Instead, it's always about, it's usually not even somebody who is educated in the subject that they're talking about or ranting about. And that's okay, too. It's not to say that no, but they need to have more people on. Now people are scared to go on because, and by scared, I mean, it's not necessarily they're scared about the material, but they're scared that there's going to be this backlash. I've seen one professor, Kevin, I have to look up his full name, but there is a Higher Chronicle is a website you can go to that is a higher education website. Like, it's an actual magazine, newspaper that we use. And, well, not that we use, that is out there. And it's been keeping track of those that have been fired. Specifically, it's usually black women and black men, or white women who teach about race and ethnicity, because it's really anybody who has the nerve to talk about race and ethnicity. Now, I teach an entire class called Race and Ethnicity, and if you go on the professor's watch list, last I looked, I wasn't there yet, but I saw people who were added on, and it gives you a reason, like, what was the reason you've added this professor? And it'll say, she talks about race and ethnicity. I teach an entire class called that. You know why? Because that's what we do.
Why is that a reason to be on this list?
It's not. And it should have never been in the first place. But because they think it's because for so long people didn't discuss race and ethnicity, right? That colorblind racism. And now, since there's classes, I like the way they say now there's classes. Even I just said it. They aren't new. There have always been these classes. You have always been able to take these type of classes for generations. But it seems to be, this kind of hating anything that's in higher education, as you said, Tim, with especially Trump supporters. But 59% of Republicans just 2 months ago surveyed said that higher education is negative, that they don't look upon it positively. And that's because it's been, through propaganda and discussed as it's like this liberal ground of indoctrination, when in reality, that's not even close to how it is.
Isn't it like the more knowledgeable you are? Oh.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Facts are called liberal. And they're not all, but that does not mean that all liberal people are using facts. That is not at all what I'm saying. But it's simple things like just looking at the basic population of the United States. And I've used that before, and somebody called me a liberal snowflake, and all I had done was give basic facts. Like, here's the percentage of this population or that population. But since anybody who's knowledgeable of these types of, and anybody who's willing to talk about these problems, the social problems that we have, are all of a sudden just outcasted, with at least on the online world. And this has been an ongoing discussion for years when it comes to open publishing and publishing our work online instead of behind paywalls. And although I am all against paywalls, I do understand why many people won't publish their information just online so everybody can read it, even after it's gone through peer reviewed and even after it's gone through all of the steps to get it into a scholarly journal. And that's because if somebody doesn't like the material, what do? Instead of talking about it or just moving on, they harass them. And I have watched so many professors get harassed after releasing information specifically about race and ethnicity or gender and sexuality in the last 2.5, 3 years.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm really glad you brought that up. Because the alt-right loves to talk about how whenever we have a speaker at a campus, those big bad liberals show up and shut us down. They don't like freedom of speech. This is the whole thing. People need to realize about the alt-right is they do the same thing too. They do it differently and more insidiously and in ways that don't get reported on and don't really get talked about. They're doing the exact same thing, and they're doing it specifically to shut down anybody who wants to talk about anything other than the white colonial narrative.
Yeah, Gail, is that list a government list, or is it just something?
No. That is absolutely, my God. No, it is not a government list. That is a list that the alt-right made. That got very popular over a very quick period of time, that has then passed around from, it was published in the front page of Breitbart. It was published there. Absolutely not government. I will state that although nobody has to tell you as an academic to not say something, you generally learn pretty quickly what not to say, and that has always been it. But I've never been more censored than in the last 9 months that I've been teaching 11 years.
That's my point, though. Why would the school care if the students aren't complaining?
Because they're getting harassed.
But you can report that and deal with the people, maybe.
I completely agree with you, and this is another ongoing conversation that's going on. Tressie McMillan, and she's on Twitter at Tressie Mac, I do believe is her name, as a sociologist who just in the last month did an interview saying that schools need to be more willing to back us up when all we're, if all we're doing is publishing and discussing our work, which is what we've always done. But so many schools aren't willing to do it. They're not willing to take the controversy. Do you remember the Mizzou controversy? The woman who was fired because she stood up for Black Lives Matter activists who were occupied on Mizzou's campus in Missouri?
No, I heard a couple different stories of different things.
Yeah, there are plenty. Yeah. This one's a couple years old. That's why I asked. Her name is Melissa, I can't even think of her last name. There have been so many cases, you're right. But what happens is you get these very wealthy donors who will pull their money from schools. And right now, schools have all been cut all around the nation for the last 10 years, if not longer. Their funding has been cut, and they have to rely on donors. And when that's what happened with Mizzou, donors threatened to take away their funding. And so they had to fire her. I have to see what her name was. It's going to drive me nuts. And then you get, depending on what state you're in, how their funding has been cut. So the schools basically say, okay, is it worth going to fight for, even though it's harassment, they're nonstop calling, is it worth hiring a lawyer, doing this, doing that? Or would it be cheaper to just get rid of this professor? Now, if they have tenure, that's a whole other story. And that goes back to what we talked about yesterday with the unions. There may be that kind of protection there, but 75% of professors today are adjunct, meaning that they are not tenured. When I started teaching 11 years ago, it was 75% were tenured, 25% were adjunct. Within 10 years, it went to 25% are tenured, meaning they have some protections. 75% are adjunct, which means they have almost none.
Well, I didn't know that. I thought most professors were tenured after so many years working.
Nope. Yeah, and it's under that kind of corporate, pay is the way they see it.
There's a narrative out there that's used to justify this hatred of professors and intellectuals, and it's the cultural Marxism narrative. And I've gone to college, I've had different professors on different subjects. I have never once felt like I was having Marxism shoved down my throat. And none of the students I went to college with, and nobody I talk to today who goes to college feels that is happening to them. This narrative is a bunch of bullshit. Of course, there is a liberal sensibility in the academic community. That's because, on the right, you have all the fundamentalist Christians who legitimately believe the earth is only 6,000 years old and flat. But no, this cultural Marxism narrative, anybody who goes to college and is not like a heavy alt-right Nazi type will tell you that's not happening. You get exposure to some left-wing ideas, you get exposure to right-wing ideas too. It's bullshit, and I hate that whole thing is gaining traction.
And that's not, that kind of argument has been there a long time. But you're right, it's gained that kind of traction where it's gotten this mainstream ideas where people talk about it more, specifically where I've seen it on Fox News. And the idea of cultural Marxism, and I love this one, is when they say that we're teaching multiculturalism. I would just like everybody to know that multiculturalism means treating everybody with respect. That's all it is. It's introducing people to other cultures than their own and treating people with respect. But that seems to be, very negative to the right, to the alt-right specifically. They don't like that at all, because then we have to learn about Black history, and then we have to learn about Native history, and then we have to learn about other countries or cultures that are coming, into the United States. Or in my class, we look at cultures around the world. And I want to go back to this idea that everybody teaches, is nonstop Marx stuff. As somebody, and I know I brought up Marx in the last episode, I talk about Marx on 3 days during a 16-week period. 3 days. And I'm sociology. He's the father of sociologists. They will hear his name 3 separate days. That's it. Because there's a zillion things to talk about. There are more people than just Marx. There are many theorists out there. There are many ideas. And instead of just focusing on one idea, we want to look at all the ideas that were presented during that time, and then the next, generation and the generation following that. But we're especially in sociology, because Karl Marx is the father of sociology. So you do hear that a lot. But usually, we're talking about more than just that. And by the way, those 3 days, I'm talking about less than a quarter of a 50-minute class period is talked about Karl Marx.
Yeah. And, for anybody who wants to just, go debunk this whole thing, let's take the what's held up as the example of all the evils of, liberal indoctrination, Harvard University. You can go to iTunes University. iTunes, they have music, they have podcasts. They also have what's called iTunes University. And there's a Yale philosophy course. There's a Harvard ethics course. And they give you the syllabus and all the books that are read, and you can actually see each lecture videotaped from that course. It's so balanced. And the instructor just puts it out there, these different ideas. He talks about Bentham. He talks about Locke. He talks about, different voices in ethics. But Bentham is kind of like, where a lot of liberal ideas come from, and Locke is where a lot of conservative ideas come from. And you see everybody being given equal airtime in this class. That's Harvard, which is supposed to be the center of multiculturalism. So go look for yourself, people. Don't listen to Trump, and don't listen to Fox News, and don't listen to Breitbart. Go look at an actual class from Harvard.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on the arts at all. And I think for a long time. Oh, well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think for a long time, as long as I can remember, this country hasn't really respected or cared for the arts. Not unless they're in a corporate level, like a film or some music that they can make people a lot of money. And as an artist, that kind of sucks because I know people from other countries, and they give funding to their artists, they support their artists a lot more, and I've never ever seen that in this country.
And we've seen a drastic cut with when No Child Left Behind from 2003 on of cutting the arts from the schools all around the country, K through 12, whether it is cutting just art as a whole, like the music classes are cut, theater classes have been cut down to where in the St. Louis area, at least I can tell you that it's very rare for students to be able to take art at all, even just a regular art class. I know when I was in school in the 80s and the 90s, we had art every year. It wasn't every day, but we had certain art classes, like on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'd have an hour of art or an hour of music. That's not given anymore because the funding has been cut significantly, and it's going to continue. It's going to be cut even more now that Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education. I mean, she has already stated that's going to be cut even more. So you're seeing sports cut as well, and I know that's not the same, but you can see where these extracurriculars or even just regular part of education is being completely taken away, which is why we've dropped so significantly in the world. We've dropped down to like number 62 out of 100 in the world when it comes to our K through 12 education because we've just lost so much of it. Through No Child. I mean, it's not only No Child Left Behind that plays such a big part, though. I don't think people realize how big that was.
Yeah, it was huge. But, yeah, I remember people older than me, like, that grew up probably in the 60s or 70s. They seem to have a lot more in their schools with the arts because they all were taught instruments. I think a lot of that was required for them, at least here in California, where with us it wasn't.
And we can also look at the, just on Friday of last week, the Committee on the Arts and the Humanities all resigned from President Trump's administration. I recommend anybody to go look at that resignation because they set it up to where it's spelled resist when you look at it.
Yeah,
it was brilliant. Cal Penn had been on that. I'm sorry.
I said they are artists, you know.
Yeah. And I bring up Cal Penn because he was the most well-known person. He's an actor. If you don't know, he was in
Kumar.
Harold and Kumar. Come on, everybody knows Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle.
Nolan wasn't here, and there was a reference I actually knew.
It was, and I'm going to bring that up.
The stoner reference. That's why.
But, I mean, Cal Penn has not hidden his, hate for the Trump administration. I give him that. And even though they were still on this committee, which was, I think it was all the same people who were on the committee from President Obama's administration, they were trying to at least, and I'm not always on the whole let's stay on and try to change his mind, especially with Trump, because we know it's not going to happen, right? Everybody should have learned that. That's why you have so many people resigning now. You saw Tesla, what's his name? Elon Musk, who resigned after the climate change accord or the Paris Accord situation that Trump did. But brings up a whole nother issue with with science and academics and making us out to be the enemy because, 98% of scientists in the world have a consensus on climate change, yet 86% of people in the United States think that there is no consensus and that scientists they all disagree, and that's not true.
I'd like to point out, too, that it's really telling to look at that small percentage of scientists who disagree with the consensus on climate change. Take a look at where they get their funding. Take a look at their political ideology.
Exactly. And you hear that all the time, and you should always, the number one thing I teach my students, the very first thing I teach them in an intro course is anytime you read a study, find out where the funding came from. It doesn't matter who did it. And I have yet to meet a scientist, an academic, who at least I can prove has done, something unethical. But we know it happens. But most people, and I've even within certain areas of study, even within pharmaceuticals, I've seen where, the academics come back and state, here's what we found. It was the opposite of what you want, and it still gets published. But there is that problem there of who is funding what and what information is being looked for. And always look at the funding on anything. Don't take anybody's word as proven fact, even any science. Go look at it. Go look at the consensus. Go find the information. Yesterday, a study came out stating that, and I know you're going to be shocked at this, that abstinence-only programs lead to more teenage pregnancy. We've had these same studies done since 1973. We know this, but you know what? We keep studying it because we want to keep proving it, because it doesn't change policy. The conservatives don't give a shit about that. And they want to stick with their religion and teaching abstinence only. And in those states where it is only taught, you see the highest teenage pregnancy rates. But this is something that we know, but that doesn't mean we stop studying it. We just keep every year, we do it again and go, look, same results. Now, not everything's going to always get the same results. That's why I always tell everybody, check who's funding the study and see what other studies are available on the same subject or similar subjects.
Definitely. Always check the peer review and make sure check what other people have said about it. Other scientists, not just people online.
Follow the money.
Yeah.
Always.
Follow the money.
Always.
That's why we need the Pirate Party, damn it, because the Pirate Party is all about transparency, that idea that we see where money goes. We see who's paying who to say what.
And I know within, at least with the American Sociological Association, which is the main association we have in Canada and in America, we have to, in our papers, we have to say where our funding came from, and that has to be published. Nothing will get done without it.
Yeah, that's good, and it's important, too. So, yeah, anyone else? You have anything else to add to this one, anybody?
No, I'll just keep ranting.
All right. Well, if not, thank you guys for listening. Tomorrow we will be talking about obsession with crime and punishment as it pertains to the 14 tenets of fascism in the United States. Thanks for listening. Listen again tomorrow.